Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I now move the following: that Dáil Éireann resolves that the Criminal Justice Enforcement Powers COVID-19 Act 2020, number 14 of 2020, shall continue in operation for the period beginning on the 9th day of November 2020 and ending on the 9th day of June 2021. Deputies will be aware that Section 17 of the Criminal Justice Enforcement Powers COVID-19 Act provides that the Act shall continue in operation until the 9th of November 2020, unless a resolution approving its continuation has been passed by both houses of the Oireachtas before that date. Having regard to the continuing grave threat to public health posed by COVID-19, and as provided for in the legislation, I am now bringing forward a proposal that the Act should continue in operation until the 9th of June 2021. That date aligns with the timeframe of the Government's medium to long-term strategy, Recovery and Resilience 2020-21 Plan for Living with COVID-19, which was published on the 15th of September and which spans a period of 6 to 9 months. Furthermore, the continued operation of the Act to the 9th of June next year is necessary in order to ensure that we can apply the enforcement of COVID-19 regulations made under the relevant Department of Health legislation. In this regard, the House will recall that it recently resolved that the amendments affected by Part 3 of the Health, Preservation and Protection and Other Emergency Measures in the Public Interest Act 2020 should continue in operation for the period beginning on the 9th of November and ending on the 9th of June 2021. It is important that the COVID-19 regulations and the powers contained in this Act remain in alignment for the same period. By way of background, the Criminal Justice Enforcement Powers Act was signed into law by the President on the 11th of September 2020. It provides Garda Síochána with statutory enforcement powers to ensure strict adherence to public health measures on premises, selling alcohol for consumption on the premises, having regard to the manifesting grave risk to human life and public health posed by the spread of COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic presents an unprecedented challenge to all of our society, and members of this House will be conscious that COVID-19 remains a real threat to all of us, in particular to our most vulnerable citizens. The country is now in Level 5 of the Resilience and the Recovery Plan since Thursday, the 22nd of October. This remains a critical time for our country, and we all continue to have a special responsibility to comply with the public health guidelines and regulations for the good of everybody. Under Level 5, our pubs, restaurants are closed, but I hope that they will soon reopen if we are successful in tackling the virus. I acknowledge that the public health restrictions that have been in place since the outset of the pandemic have not been easy for everyone. The pandemic has had an impact indeed on all of our lives. The vast majority of people and businesses in Ireland have complied with public health restrictions during this difficult period because they understand that doing so is the most effective way to help keep us all safe. It is also the best way to help us to return to a situation where we will have fewer restrictions or indeed no restrictions at all. The vast majority of publicans also have been fully compliant with what has been asked of them, even though they have indeed put their livelihoods on hold. However, it would be completely unfair if the few who wish to flout the law and to put their customers at risk are allowed to do so without consequences. The Criminal Justice Enforcement Powers Act gives the Gardaí the power to enter such premises, to encourage that small minority of publicans who are acting contrary to public health regulations to bring themselves into compliance, and by providing Garda Síochána with the powers to act swiftly to enforce the law where necessary. I have been advised that Garda Síochána have taken extensive action in support of the public health restrictions since the outset of the pandemic. A graduated response to policing has been adopted from the outset based on the Garda tradition of policing by consent. This approach has seen the Gardaí follow the 4 E's: engage, educate, encourage and, as a last resort always, to enforce the relevant provisions. I would like to once again compliment the Gardaí who have done exemplary work on the front line throughout the pandemic. They have been diligent and thorough in their work. They have responded to difficult situations that people find themselves in with compassion and empathy. Their response has been low-key and it has been very effective. As Minister for Justice, I am extremely grateful for their hard work and the professionalism during this extraordinary time, and I know members on all sides of the House will agree with me on this point. The Garda Commissioner's reports have supported the view that the vast majority of licensed premises have been acting in compliance with the relevant regulations. This is evidenced by the fact that the number of crime incidents recorded by Garda Síochána in relation to licensed premises between the 3rd of July 2020 and the 24th of October 2020 was 281. Less than 100 of these incidents have taken place since this law was enacted approximately 2 months ago. There were only 11 reported incidents in the week to the 24th of October 2020. These figures have to be seen in the context of the varying restrictions on licensed premises, and in particular their effect in counties which were there at the point or under levels 3 and 4. As all licensed premises are closed at present, the need for having such measures in place indeed may not seem so obvious. However, should a publican decide to ignore the current restrictions and open a licensed premises, An Garda Síochána has the power to immediately take action. Level 5 is only in place until the start of December, and I think we can all accept that COVID-19 will be with us well until 2021. In this context, therefore, and in line with the Government's Recovery and Resilience 2020-21 plan for the living with COVID, the emergency measures contained in the Enforcement Powers Act will continue to be required. The Garda Commissioner has reported to me that An Garda Síochána have not as yet issued any closure orders or compliance notices. Consideration has been given to each of the powers contained in the Act, but they have not been required to date. I am very happy that this is the case. When I introduced the legislation in this House, I said that it would be my preference that for the small minority of publicans to come into compliance, and I hope that there would be no closures under this Act. I was very clear that enforcement should be and would remain a last resort. The entire purpose of the enforcement power legislation is to try and enhance compliance, not to trick people or to catch them out. Everybody is given an opportunity to cooperate and to work with An Garda Síochána. For a licensed premises which maybe is flouting the regulations, there is no immediate penalty. The first thing that happens is that the licensee or the manager is given a direction to come into compliance. The penalties in the Act only come into play or only kick in if the publican fails to comply with that direction. Some may say the fact that no closure orders have been issued is evidence that the powers are not needed. The Commissioner is of the view that it is because of these powers that those publicans who wish to flout the law have actually come into compliance. Consequently, that is why it has not been necessary to issue any closure orders so far. The Commissioner has also noted that the legislation has supported An Garda Síochána through their graduated policing response, and he has strongly supported the continuation of these powers into 2021. Notwithstanding the existence of these provisions, I assure deputies that I fully expect that the graduated policing approach we have seen to date in all aspects of dealing with the pandemic will continue to be pursued by the Gardaí. By continuing to provide these additional enforcement powers to Gardaí, we will see an improvement in compliance with COVID regulations by publicans, by restaurateurs and operators of registered clubs in the interest of public health and in a way that will facilitate the gradual reopening of our society. Like as I indicated in my opening remarks, the continued operation of the Criminal Justice Enforcement Powers Act is closely related to the new health regulations prepared by the Minister for Health and the recently enacted Health Amendment Act 2020. I would like to refer briefly to the provisions of that Act. As provided for in the recent amendments to the Health Act 1947, the Minister for Health may make regulations prescribing provisions for the purposes of enforcement under the Criminal Justice Enforcement Act. That Minister may also make regulations prescribing penal provisions to be fixed penalty provisions. Officials from my department and the Department of Health are currently cooperating to develop statutory instruments to be made by the Minister for Health. I should say, however, that the purpose of the fixed penalty system, again, is to help change behaviour. The Government's objective here is to prevent the kind of behaviour which endangers others. A large number of fines issued for non-compliance is not the desired outcome. The matter before us today is relatively straightforward. I am simply proposing the continued but time-limited application of legislation which was scrutinised and passed by this very House only recently. The circumstances leading to the enactment of the legislation have not changed. Continued application of the Act facilitates a necessary, proportionate, carefully balanced and human rights compliance approach to address a small minority of licensed premises which are showing disregard for public health regulations. Clear safeguards have been provided throughout the Act, in particular the requirement for involvement of a Garda member of at least superintendent rank, the time-limited nature of the closures and the provision for possibility of appeal. I want to repeat a point that I made earlier. None of these provisions can be triggered unless a person fails to comply with the Garda direction in the first instance. Providing for these additional limited powers until next June will enable Gardaí to move swiftly to address those cases in which licensed premises and private clubs breach public health regulations. Once again, I want to acknowledge and support the hard work and the efforts being made by the vast majority of licensed premises to operate within the law. In conclusion, I commend this resolution to the House, and again I want to thank members for their attention. I look forward to hearing your observations on the matter. Thank you.